Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. This is episode 144. That makes us sound epic. And you can join the epicness by helping us on Patreon. There are 3 levels that you can back us on with, and you can join and get a copy of the magazine. And of course, you can ask us a question that we will answer. You can do that even if you're not a Patreon, but it's always good to have patrons whose questions we answer. Now, the first question is for Jasper today. I'm Murray Darn, by the way. I'm the assistant editor of Ancient Warfare, and answering our question is Jasper Ortash, who is the editor. Now, the latest verdict on Julius Caesar. This question is coming to us from one of our patrons. Is he a ruthless butcher or a savior of the corrupt oligarchy?
That's not a leading question at all, is it, Murray?
You've got only 2 options. You can't actually have a third.
I'm sorry. Well,
you can. No, you absolutely can. You can.
As historians, we're not allowed to make value judgments, and I think there's some value comments in there.
What, ruthless butcher? Yes.
Yeah, for instance, or corrupt republic, or corrupt oligarchy. But that's okay. There's definitely stuff to talk about with Caesar. I mean, there's always stuff to talk about Caesar. I remember from university that a professor told me that I think the year of Caesar's death and the year after is the most debated in all of ancient history. And part of the reason there is that for once we actually have a lot of relatively large amount of sources, although they're not exactly. For this period, we have a lot of sources, even though they're not exactly necessarily all as unbiased as you might like. But there are a lot of them. I mean, you have Plutarch's Lives, you have Caesar's own work. There's Cassius Dio, there's Appian. There's more that I'm forgetting. There's actually quite a few of ancient sources. And whether there's a latest verdict or not, I have to admit, I'm not even sure what the latest biography of Caesar is. Goldsworthy, maybe? I think he wrote one fairly recently. But I actually looked in a somewhat older book, and I saw that some of the concepts or the ideas about Caesar, they've been around for a long time. I think Caesar is one of those people, just like Napoleon. He gets this enormous amount of stuff done, and he achieves an enormous, a huge amount of things. But academics have always known, or anybody who's studied the sources have always known, that he's not exactly an unblemished character. I think I was this morning. I looked at Julius Caesar, Man, Soldier, and Tyrant, which again, speaking of value judgment in the title, by J.F.C. Fuller, which is a book from about 60 years ago. And I think everybody would agree if you said with his judgment that he says, Caesar is somebody from an elite background who has all the trappings of somebody from the Roman upper classes. So he's part of that oligarchy, family-wise, and he hobnobs with them. And he is a very shrewd, astute, energetic opportunist. He's a very clever operator. In comparison to some others, he is perhaps a bit more subtle in dealing with his enemies. He certainly, he has a reputation. I mean, it's famously supposed to have wept when he landed in Egypt and was presented with Pompey's head. Perhaps he had other ideas in mind for Pompey's head and or all the other attached parts. And he was thwarted in those. But he's not, the period where he is in sole control of Rome does not seem to become such an almost out of control murder fest as it is under, when Sulla is in sole power. And you get all the proscriptions and people get banished or killed for all kinds of spurious reasons, but mostly having to do with money. Or if you look at the second triumvirate, which, that is established after his death to avenge his death. And those guys, among them, of course, Octavian, later Augustus, aren't exactly subtle in dealing with their enemies either. So, that's sort of a on the plus, perhaps. But Caesar also, of course, when we're talking about ruthless butcher, I'm not sure if he's a more or less ruthless butcher than any other Roman of the same era when it comes to people, barbarians, non-Romans and non-Greeks. Anybody who stands in their way is just grist for the mill. In that respect, he's absolutely a ruthless butcher. But they all are, and that's expected behavior, I think, at the time. I forget if there's Murray you might know if there's commentary at the time about how he deals with the Gauls.
I don't think there's any judgment call on that other than the price of slaves goes through the floor. Because he's flooded the market.
Yeah, but that's not the only time that happens either.
True, but it's not like they're appalled at the number of people he's killing in the conquests for the Roman Empire. So I think it's, and I think when all of the Roman conquests, those are good victories for Rome. So it's a matter of perspective that has changed over time. But from the Roman perspective, as you say, he's no more of a butcher than anyone else.
Does he remove the oligarchy? No, I think that's just a propaganda ploy that makes him seem like he's with the Roman people. But in the end, it's just, it's probably his clique. And of course, we don't know what would have happened if he hadn't been murdered. But I think it's likely that something akin to what Octavian later set up would have come to pass, possibly because various high-placed Romans had seen that the situation in the Roman Republic had destabilized to such an extent over the previous 50 years that any other solution just wouldn't have worked. You possibly just needed to have somebody who, combined the two crucial sources, money and soldiers, and settled down Roman politics until and unless they could find another solution. But the Roman Republic as an institution perhaps failed in its duties towards its soldiers, and that failure was capitalized upon by ambitious politicians. And as long as that was not resolved, you were always going to get rich men with a lot of money who were going to get power for themselves. And in the end, the only way to fix it appears to have been for somebody to get the money and get the power, and then you have an empire.
Latest opinion. They're all there's all the opinions, I think, and interestingly, there always has been.
I think they always have been. We've always known that he was ambitious, and people admire him because of what he managed to do. But that goes for Alexander the Great, and it goes for Napoleon, and it goes for a host of other people. And the value judgments were left to somebody else.
Populists. No. Yes, indeed. Well, thank you. That's been another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Join us next time.